Marcus Chen stood at the edge of the training ground, watching his classmates prepare for another round of combat simulations. The Galactic Defense Academy buzzed with activity as cadets from dozens of species sharpened their skills. Tall crystalline Zephyrians moved with fluid grace, their bodies naturally attuned to energy manipulation. The four-armed Krathos practiced their devastating combo attacks, while the telepathic Mindari floated serenely, their mental powers rippling through the air like invisible waves. Then there was Marcus, human, ordinary, powerless. 5 years he had been here, longer than any other cadet in the Academy's 1,000-year history. Most species manifested their combat abilities within months of arriving. The lucky ones discovered their powers on their first day. Marcus had been tested, prodded, scanned, and analyzed by every expert the galaxy had to offer. The conclusion was always the same. He possessed no detectable supernatural abilities whatsoever. Chen. Instructor Vex's voice cut through the morning air like a plasma blade. The reptilian saurian scales shifted from green to an annoyed orange as he approached. Another failure yesterday. The Combat Council is meeting about your status again. Marcus nodded, having expected this conversation. Yesterday's simulation had been particularly humiliating. While his partner, a young Zephyrian named Kayla, had single-handedly destroyed half the enemy forces with her light-based attacks, Marcus had managed to eliminate exactly 0 targets. His standard-issue pulse rifle had jammed, his tactical scanner had malfunctioned, and he'd spent most of the exercise hiding behind debris. "I know what they're going to decide," Marcus said quietly. "It's time, isn't it?" Vex's scales flickered to a more sympathetic blue. Despite his gruff exterior, the instructor had grown fond of the determined human over the years. "The council meets at noon. I'm sorry, Chen. We all hoped—" "It's okay," Marcus interrupted, though his voice betrayed the disappointment he felt. "I knew this day would come." The Galactic Defense Academy wasn't just a military school. It was the premier training ground for the galaxy's elite warriors, those blessed with the supernatural abilities that made them capable of defending civilized space against the various threats that lurked in the void. Every species that had achieved interstellar travel possessed some form of enhanced combat capability. Every species except humans. When humanity had first made contact with the galactic community 50 years ago, there had been excitement. A new species meant new abilities, new ways to fight the darkness. But as years passed, it became clear that humans were normal. They possessed no telepathy, no energy manipulation, no enhanced physical capabilities beyond basic fitness. They were, by galactic standards, completely ordinary. Still, the Academy had accepted human candidates out of courtesy and hope. Perhaps their abilities were simply dormant, waiting for the right trigger. Marcus had been the most promising candidate, scoring highest on tactical assessments and showing remarkable determination. If any human could manifest powers, it would be him. But 5 years of intensive training, meditation, combat stress, and even experimental procedures had yielded nothing. Marcus remained stubbornly, completely normal. As he walked through the Academy's corridors, Marcus reflected on his journey. He had arrived as a hopeful 18-year-old, convinced that he was destined for greatness. Earth's government had chosen him personally from millions of applicants. He was supposed to prove that humanity belonged among the galaxy's defenders. Instead, he had become a cautionary tale. The other cadets treated him with a mixture of pity and puzzlement. Some, like Kayla, had tried to help him find his abilities through various techniques. Others whispered that humans simply weren't meant for this life. A few of the more arrogant species saw him as proof of human inferiority. Marcus passed the Hall of Heroes, where statues of legendary warriors lined the walls. Gorvak the Mindbreaker, whose telepathic abilities had single-handedly ended the Void War. Selenia Starweaver, who could manipulate gravity itself. Thane Ironwill, whose energy shields had protected entire planets. Would there ever be a human among them? Would his failure doom his entire species to remain on the sidelines while others fought for galactic freedom? The Academy's central spire housed the Combat Council chambers. As Marcus approached, he could hear heated voices through the reinforced doors. The debate had been raging for months. Some council members wanted to give him more time. Others argued that 5 years was more than generous, and that continuing his training was a waste of resources. The human shows no signs of developing abilities, came the deep voice of Council Leader Thane, a massive Krathos whose forearms gestured emphatically. We have exhausted every known method of power manifestation. Perhaps it is time to accept that some species are simply not suited for combat roles. But his tactical scores remain among the highest in Academy history, countered Instructor Vex. His understanding of strategy and battlefield dynamics is exceptional. Surely there must be a place for such skills. Strategy is useless without the power to implement it, replied Counselor Mira, her Mindari voice carrying undertones of mental static. In real combat, he would be dead within seconds. We cannot send him to his death simply to spare his feelings. Marcus pressed his ear closer to the door. His fate was being decided by beings who had never experienced powerlessness, who had been born with abilities that made them demigods compared to ordinary humans. How could they understand what it meant to fail so completely at the one thing you had trained your entire life to do? A soft chime indicated that the noon hour had arrived. Marcus straightened his uniform, took a deep breath, and prepared to face his future. Whatever the council decided, he would accept it with dignity. He owed that much to humanity, even if he had failed them. The massive doors swung open with a hydraulic hiss. Inside, 12 beings representing the galaxy's most powerful species sat in a circle around a holographic display showing Marcus's training records. 5 years of data, thousands of hours of footage, all documenting his repeated failures to manifest even the slightest supernatural ability. Cadet Chen, Council Leader Thane's voice boomed across the chamber. Please step forward. Marcus walked to the center of the circle, his footsteps echoing in the vast space. Above him, the Academy's motto glowed in letters of pure energy: power through unity, strength through diversity. He had memorized those words on his first day, believing he would someday embody them. Now they felt like a mockery. Cadet Chen, Thane continued, his 4 massive hands folded before him. The time has come to make a decision about your future. The silence in the council chamber stretched like a taut wire. Marcus stood perfectly still, his hands clasped behind his back in proper military fashion. Around him, 12 pairs of alien eyes studied him with expressions ranging from sympathy to frustration. Council Leader Thane's 4 hands drummed against the smooth surface of his seat, a nervous habit that Marcus had observed during previous disciplinary hearings. The massive Krathos was clearly struggling with the decision. Your case presents us with an unprecedented situation, Thane finally began. Never in the Academy's history has a cadet remained this long without manifesting abilities. Your tactical scores are remarkable, your dedication unwavering, and your character beyond reproach. Yet I'm useless in actual combat, Marcus finished, his voice steady despite the turmoil in his chest. Counselor Mira's telepathic tendrils flickered with what might have been surprise. Your directness is refreshing, she said, her mental voice carrying overtones of respect. Most cadets in your position would make excuses or plead for more time. Marcus almost smiled. I've had 5 years to come to terms with reality, Counselor. I know what I am and, more importantly, what I'm not. Instructor Vex shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Over the years, he had grown genuinely fond of the stubborn human who refused to give up despite overwhelming evidence that he didn't belong here. The question, Vex interjected, is what we do now. Simply dismissing Cadet Chen seems wasteful. Agreed, said Counselor Ilex, a Zephyrian whose crystalline form sparkled as she spoke. His strategic mind could serve the Academy in other capacities, perhaps as an instructor or analyst. The suggestion hung in the air like a dead thing. Marcus could see the future stretching before him. Endless years watching others achieve what he never could, relegated to theoretical work while real warriors fought real battles. It would be a special kind of torture, designed with the best of intentions. With respect, Counselor, Marcus said carefully, I didn't come here to become a teacher. I came to serve the galaxy as a defender. If I can't do that, then what do you propose? Thane asked, his scales shifting to an orange hue that indicated curiosity. Marcus had been thinking about this moment for months, ever since it became clear that his time was running out. There must be other ways to serve. Non-combat roles that still contribute to galactic defense. Research, support, logistics. The Academy is a combat institution, Counselor Brix rumbled, his stone-like golem features impassive. We do not train clerks. But perhaps, Counselor Mira interjected, her mental voice thoughtful, there are opportunities beyond the Academy's walls. The council members exchanged glances, and Marcus could sense some kind of silent communication happening between them. After several minutes, Thane leaned forward. There is one possibility, he said slowly. The Frontier Research Station on Kepler 442b has requested additional security personnel. It's not a combat posting, strictly speaking, but it does involve protecting valuable assets in a potentially dangerous environment. Marcus felt his heart leap, but he kept his expression neutral. What kind of research station? Xenobiology and Cultural Studies, Counselor Ilex explained. The planet hosts several primitive civilizations that we're monitoring for potential inclusion in the galactic community. The work is largely observational, but the remote location and valuable data make security necessary. It's essentially a babysitting job, Counselor Brix added with what might have been disdain, watching over scientists and keeping wildlife away from equipment. Hardly the glorious career you imagined. Marcus considered this. It wasn't what he had dreamed of, but it was something, a chance to serve even in a small way. What would my duties include? Perimeter patrol, equipment maintenance, and general security, Thane replied. The station houses approximately 50 researchers from various species, plus their families in some cases. The local fauna can be aggressive, but nothing that standard weapons and protocols can't handle. No combat abilities required, Instructor Vex added with a meaningful look. It was a consolation prize, and everyone in the room knew it. A way to let Marcus serve without actually expecting him to accomplish anything significant. But it was also an opportunity to prove himself in a different way. I accept, Marcus said without hesitation. Counselor Mira's tendrils flickered with surprise. You don't wish to consider the decision? The posting is for a minimum of 2 years and Kepler 442b is quite remote. Communication with Earth would be limited. With respect, Counselor, what is there to consider? You're offering me a chance to serve the galaxy in a meaningful way. That's all I've ever wanted. The council members exchanged another round of silent communication. Finally, Thane nodded. Very well. You'll depart for Kepler 442b in 3 days. Use that time to complete your final paperwork and say your goodbyes. Thank you, Marcus said, offering a sharp salute. I won't disappoint you. As he turned to leave, Counselor Mira's mental voice touched his mind gently. Cadet Chen, sometimes the galaxy has strange ways of revealing our true purposes. Do not be so quick to assume you know what yours is. Marcus paused at the chamber doors, considering her words. Then he nodded and walked out into the corridor, where his fellow cadets were waiting anxiously for news. Kayla, his Zephyrian partner, was the first to approach. Her crystalline features showed genuine concern. What did they decide? I'm being transferred, Marcus replied simply. Frontier duty on Kepler 442b. The group of cadets exchanged glances. They all knew what that meant. It was a polite exile, a way to keep Marcus in the system without admitting that the Academy had failed. That's good, Kayla said, though her tone suggested otherwise. You'll be able to serve the galaxy. Yes, Marcus agreed. Just not the way I expected. Over the next 3 days, Marcus packed his few belongings and prepared for departure. The Academy's quartermaster issued him standard Frontier equipment, a basic pulse rifle, environmental suit, communication gear, and a small medical kit. Nothing fancy, nothing that required supernatural abilities to operate. On his final evening, Instructor Vex found him in the Academy's observation deck, looking out at the stars. Regrets? The Saurian asked, settling beside him. Some, Marcus admitted. I really believed I would find my power here. I was so certain that humans were meant for something greater. Perhaps you are, Vex said quietly. Perhaps your purpose simply isn't what you expected it to be. Marcus turned to look at his instructor. Do you really believe that, or are you just trying to make me feel better? Vex's scales shifted to a thoughtful purple. In my experience, the galaxy has a way of putting beings where they need to be, even when they don't understand why. You may find that Kepler 442b holds more opportunities than you realize. The next morning, Marcus boarded a transport ship bound for the Outer Rim. As the Academy shrank behind him, he felt a mixture of sadness and anticipation. One chapter of his life was ending, but another was beginning. Kepler 442b awaited, with its primitive civilizations, aggressive wildlife, and lonely research station. It wasn't the heroic destiny he had imagined, but it was his destiny nonetheless. And somewhere in the depths of space, forces were already moving that would soon test whether humanity's true strength lay in supernatural powers or something far more fundamental. The transport ship Galactic Dawn dropped out of hyperspace with the characteristic shudder that Marcus had never quite gotten used to. Through the viewport, Kepler 442b hung like a blue-green jewel against the cosmic darkness, its 3 moons casting complex shadow patterns across unfamiliar continents. "Beautiful world," commented Captain Zara, a weathered Mindari whose telepathic abilities made her invaluable for navigating the treacherous hyperspace routes to frontier worlds. "Almost makes you forget how dangerous it can be." Marcus pressed closer to the viewport, studying the planet that would be his home for the next 2 years. Vast oceans dominated the surface, broken by scattered land masses covered in what appeared to be dense vegetation. "What makes it dangerous?" "The locals aren't the problem," Zara replied, her mental voice carrying undertones of amusement. "They're actually quite peaceful. It's the wildlife you need to worry about." Evolution went a bit wild here. Some of the predators are impressive. The approach to the research station took another hour, giving Marcus time to review the briefing materials he'd been provided. Kepler 442b hosted 3 distinct intelligent species at various stages of development. The Keth were aquatic beings who had recently discovered agriculture. The Vrex were terrestrial hunters who used primitive tools. Most interesting were the Yila, a young humanoid species that had just begun forming organized settlements. None of them were ready for galactic contact, which meant the research station operated under strict non-interference protocols. The scientists observed, recorded, and analyzed, but never directly interacted with the native populations. The research station itself was a marvel of engineering, built into the side of a mountain to minimize its environmental impact. Its reflective hull made it nearly invisible from the ground, while powerful shields protected it from both weather and wildlife. As the transport approached the landing bay, Marcus could see the sophisticated sensor arrays that monitored the entire planet. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the station's director, met Marcus at the airlock. She was a compact woman in her 50s with graying hair and the intense gaze of someone who had spent decades studying alien life forms. "So you're our new security officer," she said, extending a hand in the traditional human greeting. "I have to admit I was surprised when they told me they were sending a human. Usually we get Krathos or Saurians for security work." Marcus shook her hand, noting the firm grip. "I'm probably not what you expected, but I'll do my best to keep your people safe." Dr. Vasquez smiled. "I've read your file, Cadet Chen. Highest tactical scores in Academy history, even if you can't throw energy bolts or read minds. Honestly, I prefer it that way. Some of the previous security officers were a bit overzealous." She led him through the station's corridors, pointing out key areas along the way. The facility was larger than it appeared from outside, with multiple levels carved deep into the mountain. The upper levels housed living quarters and common areas, while the lower levels contained laboratories, data processing centers, and the main observation deck. "We have 47 researchers currently," Dr. Vasquez explained as they walked. "Xenobiologists, anthropologists, linguists, and cultural analysts from 12 different species, plus their families, which brings our total population to about 70. Your job is to keep all of them safe and secure." They paused at an observation window that looked out over a vast valley. In the distance, Marcus could see what appeared to be a small settlement of primitive huts clustered around a river. "Yila Village," Dr. Vasquez said. "About 2,000 individuals. They're fascinating people. Physically, they're remarkably similar to humans, though their bone structure is slightly different. What's really interesting is their social development. They show signs of abstract thinking and artistic expression that are quite advanced for their technological level." Marcus studied the distant village. "Are they aware of your presence?" "We don't think so. The station's camouflage is quite effective, and we maintain strict protocols about outside activity. When we do need to venture out for sample collection or equipment maintenance, we use personal cloaking devices." They continued the tour, and Marcus was impressed by the sophistication of the operation. The research station was essentially a small city, complete with hydroponic gardens, recreation facilities, and even a small school for the researchers' children. His quarters were Spartan but comfortable, with a small sitting area, sleeping alcove, and personal workstation. The walls were lined with displays showing security feeds from around the station and the surrounding area. "Your predecessor left detailed protocols," Dr. Vasquez said, handing him a data tablet. "The main threats are environmental. The local predators are quite large and aggressive, particularly the nocturnal hunters. We've had a few close calls over the years." Marcus scrolled through the incident reports. The previous security officer, a four-armed Krathos named Grak, had dealt with everything from equipment malfunctions to wildlife incursions. Most incidents were minor, but a few caught Marcus's attention. "What's a shadow stalker?" he asked, pointing to a report from 6 months earlier. Dr. Vasquez's expression grew serious. "Large predator about the size of a terrestrial tiger, but much more intelligent. They're pack hunters with natural camouflage abilities that make them nearly invisible." Grak had to deal with a pride that started hanging around the station's perimeter. Eventually, he managed to drive them off, but it took several energy blasts and some impressive acrobatics. Marcus nodded, making mental notes. Energy blasts and acrobatics were definitely not in his skill set, but he had other tools available. "The wildlife isn't the only concern," Dr. Vasquez continued. "We also monitor for signs of outside interference. There are pirates and raiders in this sector who would love to get their hands on our research data. The information we're collecting about primitive civilizations is quite valuable to certain parties." "What kind of parties?" "Slavers, mostly. Species at the Yila's developmental stage make excellent workers if you're not particular about ethics. There's also a black market for cultural artifacts and biological samples." Marcus felt a chill. He had known that evil existed in the galaxy, but thinking about it in abstract terms was different from confronting the reality that innocent beings might be exploited for profit. "Has there been any sign of such activity in this system?" "Not recently, but we maintain constant vigilance. The nearest patrol base is 3 days away at maximum warp. If something happens, we're on our own until help arrives." That evening, Marcus joined the research staff for dinner in the main cafeteria. The meal was a mix of Earth cuisine and dishes from various alien worlds, prepared by an automated kitchen system that could accommodate dozens of different dietary requirements. The researchers were an eclectic group, ranging from young graduate students to elderly professors who had spent their entire careers studying primitive civilizations. They welcomed Marcus warmly, though he could sense their curiosity about why a human had been assigned to their security detail. Dr. Kethavar, a tall Zephyrian xenobiologist, was particularly friendly. "We've been studying the local ecosystem for 3 years now," he explained, his crystalline features animated with enthusiasm. "The biodiversity here is remarkable. We've cataloged over 10,000 species so far, and we're barely scratching the surface." "Any of them particularly dangerous?" Marcus asked. "Oh, quite a few," Dr. Kethvar replied cheerfully. "The shadow stalkers Dr. Vasquez mentioned are probably the worst, but there are also acid spitters, bone crushers, and my personal favorite, the mimic vines." "Mimic vines?" "Carnivorous plants that can imitate other species. They're incredibly sophisticated. I've seen them mimic everything from small mammals to fallen logs. One nearly got me last month when it disguised itself as a research probe." After dinner, Marcus made his first patrol around the station's perimeter. The evening air was thick with unfamiliar scents and sounds. In the distance, he could hear the calls of alien creatures echoing through the forest. The 3 moons cast an eerie light that created moving shadows among the trees. The station's sensor grid showed no immediate threats, but Marcus knew that technology could fail. He would need to rely on his human senses and training to keep everyone safe. As he completed his circuit, Marcus reflected on his new situation. It wasn't the glorious career he had imagined, but there was something appealing about protecting these dedicated researchers as they worked to understand the galaxy's mysteries. For the first time in months, he felt like he had a purpose. He had no way of knowing that within weeks that purpose would be tested in ways he could never have imagined. 3 weeks into his assignment, Marcus had settled into a comfortable routine. His days began before dawn with a perimeter check, followed by equipment inspections and security briefings with the research teams heading into the field. The work was methodical and peaceful, exactly the kind of assignment that a powerless human could handle without embarrassing himself. The researchers had grown comfortable with him as well. Unlike his predecessor, who had solved problems with overwhelming force, Marcus approached security challenges with careful planning and creative solutions. When a pack of bone crushers had started threatening the eastern sensor array, he hadn't blasted them into submission. Instead, he had studied their behavior patterns and installed sonic deterrents that convinced them to hunt elsewhere. Dr. Vasquez had been impressed. Grack would have killed half the pack and scattered the rest, she told him after reviewing his solution. Your approach is much more elegant. Marcus appreciated the compliment, but he knew elegance was just another word for not powerful enough to do it the direct way. Still, his methods worked, and that was what mattered. On this particular morning, the station was buzzing with excitement. Dr. Lyra Tanash, a young Yila specialist, had made a breakthrough in her translation of the local language. The Yila had developed a sophisticated oral tradition, and she believed she was close to understanding their creation, myths. This could revolutionize our understanding of early sapient development, she explained, to the gathered researchers at the morning briefing. The complexity of their cosmological thinking is far beyond what we expected for their technological level. Marcus listened with interest while monitoring the security displays. The night had been quiet, with only the usual background chatter from the local wildlife. The sensor grid showed all green, and the automated perimeter defenses were functioning normally. I'd like to get closer to the village, Dr. Tenish continued. The acoustic quality of our distant recordings isn't sufficient for the subtle linguistic analysis I need to do. Dr. Vasquez frowned. You know the non-interference protocols, Lyra. We can't risk direct contact. I'm not talking about contact, Dr. Tenish replied. Just getting within a few hundred meters. The advanced directional microphones could pick up individual conversations from that range. The debate continued for several minutes, with various researchers weighing in on the risks and benefits. Marcus paid half attention while reviewing the overnight sensor logs. Everything appeared normal, but something felt off. He had learned to trust his instincts over the years, even when the technology disagreed. The meeting broke up with no decision reached about Dr. Tenish's request. Marcus made a mental note to discuss additional security protocols with her later. If she was determined to get closer to the village, he wanted to ensure it was done safely. The morning passed uneventfully. Marcus completed his equipment checks, reviewed the duty rosters, and conducted a training session with the research assistants on emergency procedures. The afternoon brought a new challenge when Dr. Kethvar's team reported that their sampling drone had malfunctioned and crashed in a heavily forested area about 5 kilometers from the station. The terrain is too rough for our normal recovery procedures, Dr. Kethvar explained. We'll need someone to go out on foot and retrieve the data core. Marcus studied the crash location on the tactical display. The area was dense forest with significant predator activity. Not ideal, but manageable with proper precautions. I'll handle it, he said. Give me the coordinates and any specific hazards I should know about. Are you sure? Dr. Kethavar asked. The forest in that area is particularly dangerous. Lots of Shadowstalker sign. Marcus nodded. I'll take the portable shield generator and full sensor suite. If I encounter anything I can't handle, I'll abort and return with a larger team. An hour later, Marcus set out into the alien forest. He moved carefully, using his training to minimize noise and avoid obvious predator paths. The portable sensor package warned him of several dangerous creatures in the area, but none seemed immediately threatening. The crashed drone was easy to locate, its metallic hull standing out against the organic chaos of the forest floor. Marcus approached cautiously, scanning for threats. The data core was intact, and he was able to extract it without difficulty. As he prepared to return to the station, his sensors detected movement nearby. Something large was approaching through the underbrush, moving with the fluid stealth that characterized Shadowstalkers. Marcus froze, his hand moving instinctively to his pulse rifle. The creature emerged from the trees about 50 meters away. It was massive, easily 3 meters long and built like a terrestrial panther crossed with a tank. Its hide seemed to shift and change color, making it difficult to focus on. Intelligent yellow eyes fixed on Marcus with predatory interest. Marcus remained perfectly still. Shadowstalkers were ambush predators that relied on movement to trigger their attack response. If he could avoid startling it, the creature might lose interest and move on. For several tense minutes, predator and human regarded each other across the forest clearing. Marcus controlled his breathing, kept his movements minimal, and tried to project calm confidence. The Shadowstalker's head tilted slightly, as if puzzled by this strange creature that neither fled nor attacked. Finally, the predator seemed to lose interest. It turned and melted back into the forest with fluid grace. leaving Marcus alone with his racing heartbeat. The return journey to the station was uneventful, and Marcus delivered the recovered data core to Dr. Kethvar's team. But as he filed his incident report, he couldn't shake the feeling that his encounter with the Shadow Stalker had been more significant than it appeared. That evening brought a new crisis. Dr. Tanesh had decided to pursue her linguistic research despite the morning's inconclusive discussion. She had taken a portable recording suite and ventured toward the Yila village, hoping to capture higher quality audio samples. She never returned. Marcus learned of her disappearance when she failed to check in at the scheduled time. A review of the security logs showed her leaving the station's protected perimeter at approximately 1400 hours. She had been due back by 1800. "We have to assume she's in serious trouble," Dr. Vasquez said grimly as the senior staff gathered in the command center. "The forest between here and the village is full of predators." Marcus was already suiting up for a rescue mission. "I'll take the emergency medical kit and full sensor package. If she's injured, I'll stabilize her and call for backup." "You can't go alone," protested Dr. Kethvar. "It's too dangerous." "With respect, Doctor, I'm the only one here trained for this kind of operation. The rest of you are researchers, not soldiers." The track to the Yila village was well established, making it relatively easy to follow Dr. Tanesh's path. Marcus found signs of her passage at regular intervals: broken vegetation, footprints in soft earth, and the occasional equipment wrapper. She had been moving confidently, apparently unaware of any danger. About halfway to the village, Marcus found her recording equipment scattered across the trail. The portable microphone array was smashed, and the data storage unit was missing. Nearby, he discovered drag marks leading into the dense forest. Marcus followed the trail carefully, his senses alert for any sign of threat. The drag marks led to a natural depression in the forest floor, partially concealed by fallen logs and heavy vegetation. And there, at the bottom of the depression, he found Dr. Tanesh. She was alive but unconscious, her clothes torn and bloodied. A quick medical scan revealed a concussion and several lacerations, but nothing immediately life-threatening. Marcus began emergency treatment while scanning the area for threats. That's when he heard the scream. It came from the direction of the Yila village, a sound of pure terror that cut through the forest like a blade. It was high-pitched, desperate, and unmistakably the cry of a child in mortal danger. Marcus froze, his hands still working on Dr. Tanesh's injuries. The scream came again, closer this time, and accompanied by other sounds. Adult voices shouting in the Yila language, the crash of something large moving through the underbrush, and underneath it all, a low growling that made Marcus's blood run cold. Through the trees, he could see the edge of the Yila village. Primitive huts clustered around cooking fires with small figures running in apparent panic. And moving among them, he could see the sleek forms of shadow stalkers, an entire pride of them. The child screamed again, and Marcus felt something stir deep within his chest. It was an unfamiliar sensation, like electricity building in his bones. The sound of terror and helplessness triggered something primal, something that had been dormant for 5 years of failed training. Marcus Chen, the human who had never manifested a single supernatural ability, felt power awakening within him for the first time. The power hit Marcus like a tsunami of molten lightning. Every cell in his body suddenly blazed with energy that he had never felt before, never even dreamed possible. The sensation was overwhelming, threatening to tear him apart from the inside. But underneath the chaos was something else: purpose. For 5 years, he had been told that humans possessed no supernatural abilities. For 5 years, he had failed every test, disappointed every instructor, and questioned his own worth. But as the Yila child's scream echoed through the forest, Marcus finally understood the truth. Human powers weren't like those of other species. They didn't manifest through meditation or training or genetic activation. They awakened through necessity, through the absolute refusal to let innocence suffer when you had the power to prevent it. Marcus rose from Dr. Tanesh's unconscious form, energy crackling around his body like visible electricity. He could feel every living thing within a kilometer radius, could sense the terror of the Yila villagers and the predatory hunger of the shadow stalkers. More importantly, he could feel the child's fear. A young Yila boy trapped in a hut while massive predators circled outside. The non-interference protocols demanded that he stay hidden, that he let nature take its course. But the child's screams had shattered something fundamental inside Marcus, and he found that he no longer cared about protocols. He moved through the forest like a force of nature, trees bending away from his passage as raw energy poured from his body. The shadow stalkers were magnificent predators, perfectly adapted to their environment. But they had never faced anything like an awakened human. The first stalker to sense his approach turned with fluid grace, its camouflaged hide rippling as it prepared to attack. Marcus didn't slow down. Energy erupted from his hands, not the focused beams that other species produced, but something wilder and more destructive. The blast caught the shadow stalker in the chest and sent it flying backward into a tree with bone-crushing force. The other predators converged on him immediately, their pack-hunting instincts overriding their individual caution. Marcus welcomed them. For 5 years he had been forced to rely on technology and tactics because he lacked power. Now, with energy burning through his veins like liquid fire, he finally understood what he was truly capable of. The battle was brief and devastating. Marcus moved with inhuman speed and strength, his human training and tactical knowledge enhanced by power that seemed to draw from the very fabric of reality. Energy flowed from him in waves, each blast precisely targeted to disable rather than kill. He didn't want to destroy these magnificent creatures. He wanted to drive them away from the village. When the last shadow stalker fled into the depths of the forest, Marcus stood alone in the clearing outside the Yila village. His body still crackled with residual energy, and he could feel the awed stares of the primitive beings who had witnessed his intervention. The Yila were humanoid, as Dr. Vasquez had mentioned. With bronze skin and large, intelligent eyes, they moved with a grace that spoke of a deep connection to their natural environment. The child he had saved was a boy of perhaps 8 years old, with the same bronze skin and dark hair that characterized his species. Marcus knelt slowly, trying to project calm and safety. The boy approached cautiously, his young mind clearly struggling to process what he had just witnessed. When he reached Marcus, he pressed his small hand against the human's chest, feeling the energy that still hummed there. The boy spoke in the musical Yila language, his words obviously questions. Marcus couldn't understand the specific meaning, but the emotional content was clear. Wonder, gratitude, and a child's natural curiosity about the strange being who had saved him. Marcus reached into his equipment pack and withdrew a small medical scanner. The boy had been scratched by one of the shadow stalkers and the wounds needed treatment. As Marcus worked, applying antiseptic and cellular regeneration patches, he found himself thinking about the cosmic irony of his situation. He had broken every protocol the research station operated under. He had revealed himself to a primitive civilization, interfered with natural events, and used supernatural abilities that weren't supposed to exist. By any reasonable standard, he had destroyed his career and possibly compromised years of careful research. But looking at the young Yila boy's grateful smile, Marcus found that he didn't care. A noise behind him made Marcus turn. A group of adult Yila had approached, moving with careful caution. Their leader was an elderly female with intricate patterns painted on her skin, obviously a person of importance in the village hierarchy. She spoke to Marcus in the same musical language, her tone respectful, but questioning. Marcus wished desperately that he could understand her words, but the emotional content was clear enough. She was thanking him for saving the child, but also asking what he was and why he had helped them. Marcus stood slowly, his hands open and empty to show peaceful intent. He pointed to himself and said his name clearly, Marcus. Then he pointed to the boy and looked questioningly at the elder. The boy spoke up, his young voice bright with excitement. The elder listened, then smiled and spoke a single word, Kavi. The child's name was Kavi. Over the next hour, Marcus found himself in the surreal position of conducting first contact with an alien civilization. The Yila were intelligent and curious, their primitive technology hiding sophisticated social structures and cultural traditions. They seemed to understand that Marcus was not of their world, but they accepted his presence with remarkable equanimity. Kavi, in particular, was fascinated by Marcus. The boy followed him around the village, chattering in his musical language and pointing out various aspects of Yila life. When Marcus produced a simple light from his equipment, Kavi laughed with delight and tried to touch the beam. But Marcus knew that this moment of peace couldn't last. He had a duty to return to the research station, to report Dr. Tanesh's condition and explain his actions. The fact that he had finally manifested superhuman abilities would create a sensation, but it would also raise uncomfortable questions about why his powers had only emerged when he chose to violate the most fundamental rules of galactic civilization. As the alien sun began to set, Marcus prepared to leave. He gathered his equipment and checked on Dr. Tenesh, who was still unconscious but stable. The trek back to the station would take several hours, and he needed to arrive before the research staff organized a larger search party. Kavi approached as Marcus was preparing to go. The boy had something in his hands, a small carved figure that appeared to be made from some kind of polished stone. He offered it to Marcus with a shy smile, speaking softly in his own language. Marcus accepted the gift carefully. It was beautiful work, depicting some kind of flying creature with spread wings. The detail was remarkable, far more sophisticated than he would have expected from a supposedly primitive civilization. "Thank you, Kavi," Marcus said, carefully pronouncing the boy's name. The child's face lit up with joy at hearing his name spoken by the strange protector. Marcus gathered Dr. Tenesh's unconscious form and began the journey back to the research station. As he walked through the alien forest, carrying his colleague's body and feeling power still humming in his veins, he reflected on how completely his life had changed in the space of a few hours. He was no longer the failed cadet who couldn't manifest abilities. He was no longer the powerless human who had to rely on technology and tactics. But he was also no longer the Marcus Chen who had always followed rules and protocols without question. The child's scream had awakened something more than just supernatural power. It had awakened the understanding that some things were more important than careers, more important than protocols, more important than fitting into the galaxy's expectations. As the research station's lights came into view through the trees, Marcus began to consider what he would tell Dr. Vasquez and the others. The truth, he decided, all of it. They deserved to know that humanity's true power had finally been revealed, and they deserved to understand the price that revelation had required. The research station's medical bay hummed with activity as Dr. Vasquez and her team worked to stabilize Dr. Tenesh. The young researcher had regained consciousness during the journey back, though she remained groggy and confused. Her injuries were healing well under the advanced medical treatment, but her memory of the attack remained fragmentary. Marcus stood outside the medical bay, still wearing his torn and energy-scorched field gear. The power that had blazed through him during the battle with the Shadow Stalkers had faded to a low simmer, but he could feel it there, waiting beneath the surface of his consciousness like a sleeping dragon. Dr. Vasquez emerged from the medical bay, her expression mixing relief and concern. "She's going to be fine," she reported. "Mild concussion, some muscle strain, but nothing permanent. She's lucky you found her when you did." Marcus nodded but said nothing. He knew that luck had played no part in the evening's events. "Marcus," Dr. Vasquez continued, studying his face carefully. "What happened out there? Your preliminary report mentioned Shadow Stalker activity near the village, but the details were sparse." Before Marcus could respond, Dr. Kethavar burst into the corridor, his crystalline features bright with excitement. "The sensor recordings!" he exclaimed. "Marcus, you have to see this." They followed the Zephyrian xenobiologist to the main observation deck, where a crowd of researchers had gathered around the holographic display. The evening sensor data played in three-dimensional detail, showing energy signatures and movement patterns from the forest around the Yila village. "Look at this," Dr. Kethvar said, manipulating the display controls. "At 1847 hours, we detected massive energy discharge from the village area. The readings are off the charts, unlike anything we've seen before." The display showed Marcus as a blazing point of energy, moving through the forest with inhuman speed. The Shadow Stalkers appeared as shifting heat signatures, converging on his position and then scattering as bursts of unknown energy erupted around them. "The power signature doesn't match any known species," Dr. Kethavar continued, his voice growing more excited with each word. "It's completely unprecedented. And look at this." He adjusted the display to show the village itself. The energy source interacted directly with the Yila population. The gathered researchers fell silent as they absorbed the implications. First contact with a primitive civilization was the most strictly regulated event in galactic law. The protocols existed for good reasons, based on centuries of experience with species that had been traumatized or corrupted by premature exposure to advanced technology. Dr. Vasquez turned to Marcus, her expression unreadable. I think you need to explain exactly what happened out there. Marcus took a deep breath, feeling the weight of dozens of alien eyes upon him. I made first contact with the Yila, he said simply. There was a child in danger and I intervened to save him. The silence that followed was deafening. Several researchers exchanged shocked glances, while others stared at Marcus as if he had announced his intention to destroy the planet. You... what? Dr. Vasquez finally managed. The Shadow Stalkers had attacked the village, Marcus continued, his voice steady despite the gravity of what he was confessing. They had a young boy cornered and he was screaming for help. I couldn't just stand by and watch him die. But the protocols, Dr. Lyra began. The protocols assume that we're dealing with abstract research subjects. Marcus interrupted. They don't account for what happens when you see a terrified child about to be killed by predators. Some things are more important than protocols. Dr. Vasquez was studying the energy readings with growing amazement. Marcus, these power signatures, they're coming from you, aren't they? Marcus nodded. I manifested abilities for the first time. Apparently, human powers don't work the way everyone expected. What do you mean? Marcus struggled to find the words to explain something he didn't fully understand himself. Other species manifest abilities through training, meditation, genetic activation. Humans are different. Our powers awaken through necessity, through the absolute refusal to let innocence suffer when we have the power to prevent it. The implications of his words hit the assembled researchers like a physical blow. If Marcus was right, it meant that humanity's lack of supernatural abilities hadn't been a deficiency at all. It had been a safety mechanism, ensuring that incredible power would only be wielded by those willing to sacrifice everything to protect others. The Academy needs to know about this immediately, Dr. Vasquez said. Moving toward the communication console. Wait, Marcus said, his voice carrying a note of command that surprised everyone, including himself. Before you contact anyone, there's something else you need to understand. He activated the holographic display and called up the detailed recordings of his encounter with the Yila. The researchers watched in fascination as Marcus knelt beside the injured boy, treating his wounds with gentle care. The Yila aren't just primitive subjects for observation, Marcus continued. They're people. Intelligent, curious, compassionate people who welcomed a strange alien into their village because he had helped them. They deserve more than to be studied from a distance like laboratory specimens. Dr. Kethvar shifted nervously. Marcus, you're talking about violating fundamental principles of galactic civilization. Non-interference protocols exist for good reasons. Do they? Marcus challenged. Or do they exist because we're afraid of taking responsibility for other species? The Yila are going to develop technology eventually. They're going to face the same challenges that every species encounters as they advance. Wouldn't it be better if they had friends to help them navigate those challenges? The debate that followed was intense and emotional. Some researchers argued passionately for maintaining the protocols, pointing out the historical examples of civilizations that had been damaged by premature contact. Others found themselves swayed by Marcus's arguments, particularly when he displayed the carved figure that young Kavi had given him. This isn't the work of a primitive mind, Dr. Tenish said, having joined the group despite her recent injuries. The artistic sophistication, the symbolic complexity, the Yila may be technologically primitive, but they're culturally advanced. As the discussion continued, Marcus felt a familiar sensation building in his chest. The power that had awakened during his battle with the Shadow Stalkers was responding to something, though he couldn't identify what. Then the station's alarm system activated, filling the corridors with urgent warning tones. What is it? Dr. Vasquez demanded, rushing to the main sensor display. The answer appeared on the screen in the form of 3 sleek starships dropping out of hyperspace. They were Predator-class raiders designed for fast strikes against isolated targets. As the researchers watched in growing alarm, the ships began their approach to Kepler 442b. Pirates, Dr. Kethvar breathed. They must have detected our research data transmissions. Marcus studied the approaching ships with professional interest. Each vessel carried approximately 50 raiders, armed with military-grade weapons and equipment. The research station's defenses were designed to handle wildlife and environmental threats, not organized attacks by sentient beings. How long until they reach us? He asked. 20 minutes, maybe less, Dr. Vasquez replied, her face pale with fear. Marcus felt the power within him responding to the threat, growing stronger as his protective instincts engaged. The researchers around him were brilliant, dedicated individuals whose work was expanding the galaxy's understanding of life itself. They deserved protection, just as young Kavi had deserved protection from the Shadow Stalkers. Evacuate the non-essential personnel to the emergency shelters, Marcus ordered, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had trained for command. Dr. Vasquez, start transmitting our research data to the Academy. If something happens to us, that information needs to survive. What are you going to do? She asked. Marcus smiled grimly, feeling electricity beginning to crackle around his hands. I'm going to do what humans do best. I'm going to protect the people who can't protect themselves. As the research staff scattered to carry out his orders, Marcus made his way to the station's main airlock. The approaching raiders had no idea what they were about to face. They expected to encounter a poorly defended research station staffed by helpless scientists. Instead, they were about to discover what happened when someone threatened the people that Marcus Chen had sworn to protect. They were about to learn why humanity's power had remained hidden for so long, and why perhaps it was better that way. The child's scream had awakened more than just supernatural abilities. It had awakened the understanding that true strength came not from the power to destroy, but from the willingness to sacrifice everything to defend those who could not defend themselves. As the raider ships entered the planet's atmosphere, Marcus Chen stepped out into the alien night, power blazing around him like a star born from human will and determination. The galaxy was about to discover that humanity's greatest strength had never been their technology or their tactics. It had always been their refusal to let evil triumph while they still had breath in their bodies.